Hi everybody. In this video, we're going to talk about proportions and proportional relationships. We'll also talk about ways that you can solve proportions for a missing value. So let's start by going over some vocabulary and key concepts of proportions. So the first thing you need to know is that a proportion is an equation stating that two ratios are equal. So if you look at the examples below, we are saying that 3/5, that ratio, is equivalent to 6/10, the other ratio. We're saying that this ratio here, A over B, is equivalent to C over D. One way you could check this is by simplifying the ratio. I know that 6/10 in simplest form would be 3/5, so I know that those are equivalent. Cross products, another important vocabulary word that we will be using a lot when we're solving proportions for a missing number. So a cross product are the two values, the two products that are found by multiplying the denominator of each ratio by the numerator of the other. So we're going to multiply the numbers that are across from each other diagonally. So the big key concept here before we get started with some examples is that if two ratios form a proportion, we're saying that their cross products are equal. If two ratios have equal cross products, then they form a proportion. They would be proportional. So let's start with some examples. Fill in the blanks so that each ratio forms a proportion. So one way we could do this is by looking at the relationship between 1 and 4. Well, how does 1 become 4 times 4? So if I want to find a number in this denominator that is equivalent here so that these form a proportion, I need to think of what is 2 times 4. Well, I know that 2 times 4 is 8. So I'm saying that this proportion 1/2 is equal to 4 over 8. Let's look at the next example. I know for 3 to become 9, I can do 3 times 3. And so I have the same number down here in the denominator, and I want to keep them equivalent, so I want to multiply by the same thing. So I'm just going to also do times 3. So 3 over 3 is equivalent to 9 over 9. All right, in this last example, the blank is actually up here, so I can't look at the relationship that's multiplying in the top, so I got to go to the bottom. So 5 times what is going to give me 10? 5 times 2. So we need to be thinking about what number times 2 would equal 6. So if you've got strong mental math skills, you may just know that number. But if not, there's another way that you could think about this problem. So instead of thinking about 5 times what is going to give us 10, think about 10 divided by what would give us 5. I know that 10 divided by 2 is going to equal 5. So then I would take this number 6, and if I divide it by 2, then I would be making an equivalent ratio. So I know 6 divided by 2 is 3. And so now I can go back and check my thinking the other way. I know that 5 times 2 is 10, so 3 times 2 should give me 6, and it does. That is a true statement. So now let's talk about solving proportions. Sometimes when we're solving proportions, the connection will be really easy, times 3, times 2, times 4. But other times we could be multiplying by fractions and decimals where it's not so easy to recognize the pattern. So one way we can solve a proportion every single time is to multiply diagonally and then set up an equation. Once we set up our equation, I'll show you how we divide by both sides or divide both sides by the coefficient. So here's our first example. We've got this b over 4 and 10 over 5. So what we're really saying here is that b over 4 is equal to 10 over 5. You can imagine an equal sign here. And step 1 says that we're going to cross multiply. So what we want to do is take these numbers that are across from each other diagonally and multiply them together. So we'll be multiplying 4 times 10, and we'll put that on one side of our equation, and then 5 times b, and we'll be putting that on the other side of our equation. So that's going to look like this. 5 times b would be 5b, and we can set that equal to 4 times 10. So now we're going to go ahead and simplify. I know that 4 times 10 is really 40. So now I have set up a one-step equation that says 5 times b equals 40, or 5 times something equals 40. I know that since this is a one-step equation with multiplication, I should use division to solve. So to solve for b, I'm going to divide by 5 on both sides. That's going to do two things for me. It's going to cancel out this 5 that's in front and get b by itself. And it's also going to simplify this on the right-hand side. So I know now that b equals 8 because 40 divided by 5 equals 8. Let's look at the next example. So in this next example, we have the ratio 8 over n and equal to 7 over 6. I went ahead and drew the equal sign for us already. So our first step is going to be to cross multiply. So we're going to multiply 8 times 6 and 7 times n. And when we do that, this is what our equation will look like. 8 times 6 on one side, 7 times n on the other side with an equal sign in the middle. So now let's simplify. What is 8 times 6? Well, that would be 48, and 7 times n is just 7n. So now if I want to solve for n and get n by itself, I need to undo this multiplication because this says 7 times n. So I'm going to divide by my coefficient, this number in front, which is 7, and I'm going to divide by 7 on both sides. And when I divide by 7 on both sides, that's going to solve for n. And then I know that 48 divided by 7 gives me this decimal number, 6.857. So you could go ahead and use your calculator to solve for that value here. And I know this says B, but that's a mistake. It should say the letter N, since that's the letter we were given. So we solve for variable N. Now I know the missing number here would be this decimal value, and these would be equivalent. Our next example, we have 2 over 4, and it is equal to 3 over r. So we're trying to solve for this missing value here, r. And the first thing we're going to do, once again, to solve for r is we're going to cross multiply and set up our equation. So we'll set up 3 times 4 equal to 2 times r. Next, we're going to simplify. So I know that 2 times r is just 2r, and I know that 4 times 3 is 12, but if I wasn't sure, I could always type it in my calculator to check. The next thing I want to do is solve for r. So I want to go ahead and divide by the coefficient. So I'm going to divide by 2 on both sides since that's the number in front of the variable. When I divide by 2 on both sides, that's going to go ahead and cancel out the coefficient and leave me with just r. And now I know 12 divided by 2 is 6, so r equals 6. So this should say letter R. So not too difficult to solve proportions. Cross multiply, simplify, and then divide on both sides by the coefficient to get your variable. All right. This time we have 3 over 7, and it is equal to 9 over w. So we are going to cross multiply 3 times w and 9 times 7, or 7 times 9. And now we're going to simplify. 3 times w is just 3w, and 7 times 9 is 63. So next I want to divide by the coefficient. So since I want w by itself, I'm going to divide by this number in front of w on both sides. So we'll be dividing by 3. 3 divided by 3, oops, did not mean to highlight that, I meant to cross through. 3 divided by 3 is 1, which is why we are just left with our 1w. And 1w can just be written as w equals, and then 63 divided by 3 is 21. So that should say letter W. So that was our last example of how to solve a proportion for a missing value. So one more time, just to summarize. First, you're going to cross multiply the numbers that are across from each other diagonally, and then you're going to simplify. After you simplify, you're going to have a one-step multiplication equation. So to solve for your missing letter, you'll divide by the number that's in front of your variable, your letter. And then last, that will solve for the variable. So go ahead and fill in your notes and then start on your practice. And if you have any questions, just check in with your teacher. Thanks, everybody.